Thank you. Before I go get started and go a little further, I just want to acknowledge that I am excited to be here in partnership with Innovate US today, which provides free workshops in digital and innovation skills for public servants. We're happy to have everyone here and we look forward to getting your feedback on the session. Give feedback as we go, but also Innovate US is building a curriculum building content that we want to make sure that supports your work. So we'll definitely be looking for feedback. And as I've mentioned, and you've probably seen in the chat, we do have folks from literally all over the country today. So I know we've got folks from Maine, from Colorado, from New Jersey, and California with us today. So I will be sharing my screen. I'm sharing a presentation for the majority, of our conversation today. And I'm just going to bring that up now, provided the technology works, and we will go ahead and get started. Please, if you've got questions, comments, etc., please do make active use of the chat. Today we'll be monitoring the chat, and maybe you'll meet some new people, some new friends, some new colleagues as well, who you can build with and collaborate with. I am happy to share, I think, the presentation after, so we can do that as well. And so with that, let's go ahead and dive in. And Kate, I will ask you, if someone asks a question in the chat throughout the presentation, if you can just flag it for me in case I missed the specific question.
You got it. Yeah, and feel free to actively use the chat and I will flag it for you, Afua. Thanks.
Great, thanks. So as I mentioned, there's a lot of things that when you hear data and government, you can think of, but I say one of the trends, but it's been a trend for the past 5 years, 10 years of this push for data-driven decision-making in government. And so there are many articles, there are many citizen groups, there are many nonprofits really pushing for government to do a better job of data-driven decision-making, or do a better job of creating policies based on data-driven decision-making, or just figure out how to use all this data that the government collects and what that looks like to make informed decisions. But what does that actually mean? How do you actually think about in your workplace, taking the data that you have access to and doing something with it, making some decisions with it, or just thinking about how you operate in your agency and how you could do that better? How do you go about thinking about, how do I structure a problem that I even need to think about data for? What's a sufficient level of data to use? What are some possible sources for me to go to? So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. And so I want to start off by just polling you all as to, what does data mean in your office? So as you are in your agencies, you're doing your work, go ahead and drop in the chat what data means in your office. Again, data, just as data-driven decision-making is a broad term. And so I want to start off by just level setting where we are and what data means. So whatever goes into the database, great question, or a great statement, and thinking then about which database, who owns the database, who's got access to the database to actually get it out. Great point. Client information, productivity measurements, reports from user, information storage, not making assumptions. Oh man, the training compliance numbers, employment information, funds and finances. Absolutely. Determining what providers to investigate. Absolutely. Interactions with the legal system, so the warrants, arrest, and those key stats that are really important. Road management. Yep, definitely. And so I think what you can notice is you're seeing how different agencies define data, program evaluation, health and emergency data, contract information as well. Data really does cross so many paths and is very specific to your specific agency. And yes, data, when structured well and defined well and accessed well and used responsibly, data is as valued as gold. Absolutely, Nimit. And so as you can see, data means a lot of things. And so also, as you can see from some of the responses in the chat, it's sensitive sometimes. It requires care. It requires intentionality to access. And because there's so much of it, it requires a little bit of navigation for what to do with that data and how you might actually use it. And so along those lines, then, I would want to ask you, as you think about your day-to-day jobs, what would you like data and data-driven decision-making to mean in your office? And go ahead also and put this in the chat. If you're comfortable, I think we've got a manageable enough group that a few folks could come off mute and go ahead and share if you want to add, another sentence or two to explain what you would like data and data-driven decision-making to mean in your office. Access to the right information at the right time to make a decision. I think that's very succinctly and powerfully stated that as we collect data, as we keep data, should be intentionally and in order to do something with that data. Seeing the data, seeing the information in real time in ways that allow people to make decisions, leading or informing open conversations between management and employees, absolutely. Wanting the data to work towards more equitable systems, super important. Complement that response with policies as well. Using data to contribute to processes to increase quality and program outputs. Absolutely. Data-driven equity is another response about the importance of equity through data and strengthening equity through proper data use. Using data to inform program development and predictions for future improvements, projects and processes. Absolutely. And so there are a wide range of responses here, again, for what you'd like data-driven decision-making to mean in your office. I went through some of the responses that some folks submitted, as well as you registered for this session, and also there saw a wide range of responses. Everything there, sorry, just also trying to stay on top of the chat. So everything in those, the registration responses, I think someone from California mentioned wanting to have data and understand how data-driven decision-making can help with reorganizing their law enforcement group and informing what their law enforcement group accomplishes. And another person from Maine wrote in saying, looking at the access to troves of internal data and finding meaningful ways to connect that data with the outside world. And finally, someone from New Jersey, when they registered, said, looking at reliable data sources as valuable tools to help patrons answer their research questions. So again, I just want to acknowledge that there's a wide range of ways that people want to look at this data and to use this. And so again, what we're going to focus on today is really going through a process for how you can frame data-driven decision-making in your offices. We'll have an exercise as well as some time at the end for more questions to dive in deeper. So I want to start by just reviewing sort of the landscape of where we are. Again, this conversation is to put this movement to really push people for more data-driven decision-making has really led to institutionalizing of data and data projects in government and state, city, local, state and local and federal levels, as well as in the nonprofit sector and with your citizens and residents as well. So at the federal level, there's the chief data scientist who sits in the White House's Office of Science and Technology Policy. That position was first created And the Obama administration is filled today as well. So really thinking about how at a federal level are we thinking about using the information across the federal government and in collaboration with state and local governments to make better decisions and to do better predictions and forecasting as well. At the state level, there's the State Chief Data Officer Network. I think that is managed out of Georgetown University, but has a number of chief data officers from across the country there. That group meets regularly to again talk about how do you build cultures of data? How do you at the state level and state government levels really think about things like privacy and structure and access and equity through the and use actually through the data that is collected and the decisions that are made at the state level. Then across the country and probably many of your offices, you have touched open data initiatives, including public-private partnerships. And so what data government agencies have made available to the public or can share with the broader public, what partnerships can be built out of that, and how that can lead to improving road quality or improving health outcomes and more. And then finally, we also have citizen and nonprofit projects that are also picking up quite a bit based on the data that government agencies have and government agencies can share and policies that government agencies implement. And so, as I mentioned, I used to work at DataKind, and this is what we did. We spent a lot of time on. And so, to just give you an example of what it can look like to use that data, I want to talk about an example from DataKind actually, and work DataKind did with Vision Zero. Now, for those of you who aren't familiar, or to refresh for those of you who've heard of Vision Zero supports a movement in the US to reduce traffic-related deaths and severe injuries. And DataKind brought together a consortium of stakeholders in each of 3 partner cities. We worked with New York City, Seattle, and New Orleans to really help support Vision Zero's mission. And so the DataKind team, after doing a lot of investigation and partnering with both Vision Zero, both with city agencies, in this case, city transportation agencies, ran some models, and the team was ultimately able to use primarily open data to build machine learning, which is built on open data sets and data there, machine learning model of all of the features of crash prediction. And so what we found is that, or what we did is we had to understand how many vehicles pass through specific intersections. We built a model that had more than 100 different features of all different data points that were there, and found that the features of major importance for predicting these traffic-related deaths and severe injuries related to traffic volume estimates, to signal counts, which is the number of signal boxes that control intersections, raised medians, and the degree of intersection, or the number of intersecting streets, as well as the count of the number of lanes on a street. And I saw in the introductions that some folks are from transportation and agencies, and so my apologies if I glossed over at too high of a level for some of those features. But what ended up being a multi-year project, and I emphasize multi-year there just to show that sometimes these data projects take a while, DataKind was able to partner with these cities to produce some interesting things. So in New York City, for example, we produced a crash model that allowed the city to examine individual locations and individual intersections for what was most at risk for crashes at those intersections. In Seattle, we were able to build a model to uncover collision patterns involving pedestrians and bicyclists. And in New Orleans, we were able to develop an impact assessment, testing the significance of installed treatments, so things like bike lanes or traffic signs to determine their effectiveness, and then to better help the city of New Orleans think about and inform the placements of future installed treatments. And so you can really see there that by understanding some of the data that's available, by doing some of the research, and by partnering with the right experts, you're able to take the data that's there to really make decisions that then have an impact on people's lives. So I want to break down this process a little bit more, in this process of making data-driven decisions. And so you can really think of it as a 5-step process. And first is understanding the agency mission. Second, defining a specific measurable problem. Third, identifying potential data sets. 4, reviewing and selecting data sets. And then 5, identifying decisions that can be made or predicted based on this data. So let's break this down and go into this a little bit more. So the first step, understanding the agency mission. And this is really crucial because any type of decision making that you're doing, you should be able to tie it back to the mission of the agency. You should be able to tie it back sort of the vision of the agency and why that agency exists. If you find yourself with a lot of data and doing a lot of great work with wonderful spreadsheets, you've got great Tableau dashboards, you've got a beautiful machine learning model built that's written in whatever tech and government tech magazine you want to think of, but it doesn't actually tie to the agency you work in, you should ask yourself if that is something you should have been doing at all. And so some of the places that you can go as you're thinking about doing this framing and really understanding that even the nuances of how you're putting this together are, reviewing your agency's mission and vision statement, reviewing your agency values, reviewing press releases and recent reporting on agencies. I know from my time in government, it's good to do some of those checks. Perhaps this is my own experience, but sometimes some of the words said in the halls and in the meetings of government buildings may not match up with what the overall mission is supposed to be at the time. And so really doing that check is important. The second thing that you want to do is to define a specific measurable problem. Charles Kettering, I think, said it best in saying a problem well stated is half solved. And this next framework here is actually taken from my time at DataKind. It's a model that we use there. And so really thinking as you are starting your process, because you want to start your process of making data-driven decision making really with a problem that you want to solve and not just designing around different data that you have. So you want to start by thinking of building out a problem statement of we want to, type of analysis you want to do, but using data so that a behavior change so that impact happens. So we'll go through this example in a little bit more detail later, but perhaps we want to increase access to sanitation by using mapping data so that people can have access to data or to sanitation devices more quickly, and so that the organization can save money on fuel cost, for example. Step 3 is identifying the problem data sets. And so you want to, for this step, really think about what data you have available. So you've got that problem statement there. You've got, that second line there of the data to use. You're going to have a high level description of the data. Then you actually have to go find out what the potential data sets are that can actually help you solve your problems and help you inform your decision making. And so for that, you're going to want to take a look at data owned by your own agency. So talk with the folks in your team, talk with the folks on your department, talk with folks outside of your specific team as well. Perhaps your agencies have worked differently than the agencies I worked in, but really being intentional to push through silos and find out sometimes even with the person in the next hall or one computer away in this virtual world have access to that you might not have access to or you might not even know about. Also consider other sources of publicly available data where you've got agreements and the right to use those. Think about data owned by potential partner organizations. For example, the FBI, we'd sometimes partner with government, or we'd sometimes partner with academic institutions and have access to data that they had with some nonprofit institutions as well, or other government agencies that were outside of, in that case, jurisdiction of the FBI or federal government as a whole. We partner with a lot of state and local agencies. And then also consider data available for purchase where your policies allow for that also. From there, you're going to want to spend the time then to review the selected data sets. And so as you do this, so you're reviewing the data sets that you've identified and selecting the particular data set, you want to consider the completeness of the data. If you are running a program for addressing the number of potholes in the city of Fort Wayne, Indiana, where I used to live at one point in my life. But you start to review the data set, and it only includes people from one part of the area. It only includes the Aboit Township of Fort Wayne, Indiana. You may want to then consider if this is a data set you could actually use, because if the policy that you're doing, the decisions you're making need to affect more than just Aboit Township in Fort Wayne, Indiana, then this might not be the right data set, or you may need to come up with a plan to expand the data set or to reshape that problem statement to better focus it on what you actually can make decisions off of. You want to consider access and ownership. So who will ultimately have access and ownership of that data? If you are partnering with another agency, for example, or partnering with another entity, whether in government or outside of government, and your agency doesn't have the sort of in perpetuity ability to turn on and to turn off access to the data, you'll just want to think through that so that whatever you're building is something that can last and can be useful beyond one iteration of use. A third thing you want to do is really investigate sources of bias. And here it's incredibly important, as folks were commenting earlier on, as to what do you want to be able to do with data and data-driven decision-making and using it for equity, really being intentional here about investigating and really pushing on sources of bias and any mitigation strategies for the data that you have access to and in those data sets is incredibly important. So, for example, if you are dealing with, let's say, SNAP benefits, and the data set that you're looking at, or the sort of decision-making model you're looking at is correlating zip code with behavior for engaging use of SNAP benefits, for example, that's probably something that you want to understand. If you are looking for information on housing and access to housing in areas that previously were redlined for certain people, that is something that you're going to want to investigate there. If you are looking for something with unemployment benefits, for example, and you notice the data is overwhelmingly skewed towards men or overwhelmingly skewed towards women, things like that, you really want to investigate those sources of bias and address it before you start to use that data to make decision making. Because if you've identified sources of bias, you don't have a mitigation strategy there, and you then use this biased information to make to drive your decision making then will then have these biases implemented in there. And then finally, you want to review the ethics of collection and use. And so I know we had a lot of law enforcement in this group based on some of the introductions earlier. Spent some time in law enforcement itself. This is an example that comes up, is just, do people consent to have their data there or not? This comes out in many cases outside of law enforcement as well. And so really thinking through the information that was, legally collected and can be used to drive decision making from there. So just examining that and making sure the right protocols are documented and followed before proceeding. The fifth and final step then is identifying decisions that can be made or predicted based on data. And so here, split this between conclusion and insights, which is essentially analysis. So these are what you can do in Excel, usually what you can do in other more forms where you've taken the data, you've got access to the data, and you're running some basic reports to help to answer the questions from your problem statement. To make these concrete decisions. You can also take a look at those data and see what can be predicted or recommended. So if, for example, I'll use a non-government agency example and say, if, for example, we were in a store and we had access to the sales purchases for a store, we could probably fairly easily look at the register from the past, look at the books from the past month, and we could make some simple conclusions about when the store is busiest on Tuesdays by running a very simple analysis. But if we wanted to then say, okay, it's great to know when the store is busiest, but we want to be able to predict 3 months from now what is going to be in stock versus out of stock, what's going to be most popular versus not so popular, that sort of prediction, that type of, we're going to be recommending to people. That's where data science, machine learning, and AI come in. So I know in addition to this push for data-driven decision-making, data science, machine learning, artificial intelligence are all sorts of fun words that are thrown around, but I like to make this distinction here of saying, as you're solving these problems, are you looking for analysis or for predictions and recommendations? So I'm going to stop here for a second and just actually see if there were any questions that came into the chat. But we'll continue to let folks be in the chat. And in the meantime, we'll just sort of take you through this process with the organization Soil, which is in Haiti. And as you might recall, as I was giving the example of a problem statement earlier, I went through and gave an example about delivering sanitation equipment, and that is taken from some work I've done with this organization called Soil Haiti. So as you will recall from that 5-step process we have, as we think about making a data-driven decision-making process, the first thing we have to do is to understand the mission of the organization, mission of the agency. And so, simple to do this, but going to a website of the particular organization you're working with, if it's your own agency, it's a lot simpler because you hopefully know what that mission is. But for the purposes of this example, we're on Soil's website, and we can go to their About Soil page and see that they're a nonprofit research and development organization in Haiti working to design, test, and implement sustainable and cost-effective solutions to the sanitation crisis. You can keep reading and see some of the things that they're think about. So some of the problems that keep them up at night as to why they're there, why they're doing that work. You can start to figure out how they work, what their process is, things like that. So as you're thinking about how are we defining a problem here, really having in mind the agency or mission, and then that second step of as you define a specific measurable problem, what the processes are that you're going to want to then leverage. Because again, as you're doing your data-driven decision-making, you always want to start with the questions that you have, the problems that you're trying to solve, and not just with, well, today I was given access to this data, or today my boss mentioned that the job numbers came out and I now need to figure out what I can do with that. You want to start with, why are we here? What are we doing? And what are the problems we actually need to solve? And so, if you click around, you continue to click around on the Soil Haiti site, you can go over to life sanitation access and see that one of the things they do with this humanitarian station is providing free sanitation services to people in Haiti. And so you think they must get the people there somehow. And so as we're defining this problem statement, we can say we want to help Soil get their sanitation services to more people. And so then as you think, how are they getting people? How are they getting this there? So what data are we using for that second step of using the data? You can think of, well, there are probably maps. There's probably some geo information that's there. There's probably some time of day information as to what traffic looks like or when people are actually in their homes, so we can take that into account. And so that the behavior change that you want to see there is that you can have the sanitation equipment delivered more quickly, and the impact, that second so that, is so that in this case we can help this nonprofit organization save money and do their great work. So again, we were able to spend some time by looking at their website to figure out and make sure we're aligned with their mission, to decide that we want to help them. We want to figure out their delivery patterns to help them use their geo information so that they can be more efficient in their deliveries, and so that they can save money in fuel purchases. So I'm going to pause there and see if there are any questions before we break out into groups and you all run this process for yourselves. Okay. So in that case, I'm going to, I think maybe, let me bring up that 5-step process once again and share my screen once again. And then I will ask Kate to help us here, and we will then go into a breakout session for, I think, 6 minutes, 7 minutes, and let you all, your own groups, feel free to go ahead and dig for yourself on a particular organization of your choice, particular nonprofit, or to use your own agency to run through this process quickly. So with that, Kate, if you want to send us into breakout rooms, we'll do that.
Yes, happening now. So you'll get an invite, and then you'll be able to join the room, and then we'll pull you back in about 7 minutes. Give me 1 second.
Hopefully,
this meeting is being recorded.
Well, welcome back. Hopefully you met some interesting new people. I'm sure you met some interesting new people in your breakout session and had a good chat. I spent most of the time we've been together talking, so I just want to create the space. Someone wants to raise their hand and sort of report out from their breakout session as to how it went, if you were able to go through and write a problem statement or to think of data sets to solve some of the challenges. So I'll just pause for a second if someone wants to use the raise hand function to share. Otherwise, I might call on someone. Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, so I don't know if this was exactly what we were supposed to be doing. We talked a little bit about something in OAG where maybe we're halfway through this process. And so basically, we have this use of force reporting portal that people in prior sessions have heard me talk about in other contexts. And one of the things we sort of discovered from that, just like doing general exploratory analyses, was that a lot of officer force is in response to situations where the subject of the force was experiencing a potential mental health incident, at least in the officer's judgment. And so that finding led us to actually pilot a program in Cumberland County where, when there's a call for service involving somebody, where there's a potential for a mental health issue, the officer is going to be accompanied by a mental health specialist, somebody with professional training to deal with that. And I say we're halfway through it because that is an example of data-driven decision making, but obviously there's going to be more data coming in, right? And so I think there are some questions that are open to me anyway. I don't know everything that goes on around this, but how do you sort of evaluate the impact of that policy, right? Like, how do you figure out whether the intervention actually did what it was supposed to do.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. And something we'll touch on just before we leave today is also the importance of building processes around this. And so part of that is creating a process that allows you to accept incoming information and really go back to the initial problem statement as to what were we trying to do here? What was the behavior change we were looking for? What was the impact we're looking for? And what is a regular measure of time that we can use to come back to evaluate these desired behavior changes and impacts? Are we any closer, or are things the way they were? But yeah, great example. I see some other comments in the chat, and so we'll give space for either someone who's in the chat to come off mute and give a voiceover to those chats, or if someone else wants to raise their hand and report out from their breakout section. Kristen, I see your hand raised, and then Ashley, you can go after that.
Hi guys. So as I said in the chat before, I work for New Jersey State Treasury Property Management, which covers leased and owned facilities, but we are Bureau of Special Services. So we encompass life safety, emergency management, and the like. The interesting point that I brought up to my breakout session was the AED example that we were talking about with CPR. Touching on the new information that's coming out, this whole type of process and training that we used to offer in person has now been impacted heavily by COVID-19. So we're trying to figure out a very good process that not only keeps people safe, but also encourages volunteers to not be adverse to getting involved. If somebody is having some sort of an attack, we would like them to be comfortable helping another person while keeping themselves safe and feeling considered, not like we're, feeding them to the lions or anything, but we don't really have enough data on how COVID-19 could be transmitted, but we do have like the external AED masks, CPR masks that don't even allow for your mouth to touch the other person. So that's definitely a different type of cost that we have to consider that goes into the contract. We just don't know the type of feedback we have to go at. Type of way to go about getting feedback for how people would be comfortable with that. I did focus more on step number 2 for a problem well stated is half solved. I did come up with we want to provide training and information on CPR/AEDs to as many state employees as possible using previous information and new health guidelines to be COVID and health conscious so that employees will be prepared in an immediate emergency situations while keeping themselves healthy and safe while assisting others until emergency professionals can arrive on site. And that's really as far as I got.
Well, your problem seems like it's nearly half solved then, because it sounds like a really great problem statement that you have defined there, really clear, really specific. So that's good. Yes, the challenge of, again, as Matt mentioned also, of making decisions as you are still collecting data, still looking at that completeness of the data and trying to build that out is an ongoing challenge. Ashley, I'll let you round out the report outs from this breakout session.
Sure, thank you. So our group, we didn't follow directions and we didn't do the problem statement, but I think we had some good conversation and wanted to just share that we talked about how like our organizations kind of in the back of our head know this process, but then you lose it over time. And then we find ourselves just like kind of starting from the middle, kind of what you said earlier, we get a new data set and then it's like, well, what do we do with this? Instead of starting with, let's identify a clear problem and then the next steps on how to solve it. So I think we, really appreciated kind of going through those steps and the value of resetting ourselves and the patience that goes into doing a very clear assessment of your needs and problems and then the data. And then we also talked about the need to reevaluate the data collection and proper use of the data. So making sure that what we're getting from our providers or what we're collecting ourselves, are we collecting it appropriately, thoroughly, ethically, and then are we using it in the same way?
There's always a rebel in these things. I'm glad you identified yourselves as the rebel group, but absolutely really, really valid points Again, we'll talk about it again, just the importance of process. And government agencies are often always pressed for some type of resource. So the temptation is always to just jump into the middle of the process or to just jump there. But again, as you think about your work sort of outlasting you and outlasting that crisis of the moment, it's really important that you, really push yourselves and your colleagues to go through the whole process there. So we are in just a few minutes, so I want to touch on some more things just to sort of guide your next steps as you leave today. And so I know we've got folks again in multiple different job categories and different levels within their organizations represented here. But I wanted to go through these 7 best practices for successful data management. This is taken from Tableau. The link is here, so you can read more when I share these slides. But I actually find this framework to be incredibly helpful. And so as you are thinking about what can you institutionalize in your organizations to make sure you're collecting the right data and that people can use it, and then you can use it for this data-driven decision-making, some things for you to keep in mind. One is building strong file naming and cataloging conventions. It sounds simple. It sounds not impressive. It sounds like something you can skip over. But if you can't find the data and you can't figure out what data set 1, 2, 3 is, you can't actually use it. So the strong file naming and cataloging conventions, whether it's using Unix timestamps or standard time date formats or whatever it is incredibly important. Secondly, you want to make sure that you're considering the metadata for data sets. And so really thinking about the descriptive information that's around the different data that's there. So maybe that's things like the author of the data or the when and where of when the data was created or captured and why. As you think about sort of your overall organization, I want to encourage you and your colleagues to be really intentional about what the data storage strategy is. If the data storage strategy is that each individual can have access to a spreadsheet on their local computer or laptop, that is something that I guarantee you will come back to bite you at some point. And so thinking about what, if you're doing cloud storage, how you do backups, making sure that you've got a backup available in another location, that is really important. Tableau and others talk about a 3-2-1 method with this. So thinking about having 3 copies of the data using 2 storage methods and making sure one of them is offsite. The next thing here is producing multiple levels of documentations about data sets. So really thinking about what documentation can you have at the project level, what documentation you can have at the file level. As an engineer, as a software engineer, I sometimes have been guilty of, the code was difficult to write. It should be difficult to understand. That is not a philosophy you should use in coding. It is also not a philosophy you should use when you're documenting your data sets, because, similar to if you can't find it, if you can't understand what data is there, you can't use it. Then, really encouraging organizations to commit to a data culture by prioritizing data experimentation and experiments. So really just, again, thinking about how can we write some more of these problem statements? How can we create a culture that says there's interesting data, there's interesting problems. Let's figure out how to combine those and use them to help improve the agency's functions. Some folks touched on, I think, especially in the comments here, the importance of thinking about the ability to trust your data, the ability to make sure it's secure, and that privacy is taken care of. So working with the CISOs in your organization for that, making sure that any PIAs or any other privacy documents are captured, are documented, and that the data that you're using is secure and privacy is respected is important. And then finally, where possible, investing in quality data management software to help you with this whole process. This last piece that I want to touch on in just the last minute or two that we have is the important reminder that I have for you all, that as you're thinking about making your organizations, your agencies more data driven, don't focus just on the technology or don't focus just on the data. I know sometimes people are like, it's all about the data, it's all about the technology, or it's all about the people using the information. It's not. It is about using the data and technology along with the people and the overall processes together in order to make those organizations strong. And so that people aspect is really making sure that you build sort of a coalition of the willing or the coalition of the voluntold to help you with some of these challenges as well. In the process, again, making sure that you're intentional about going through all 5 steps, building in a process for evaluation at the end after you've deployed some of the analytics or predictions to check for effectiveness. And so with that, I think we are just about at time. So I will wrap up here. If there are any final comments or questions that folks want to make, we've got a couple of minutes for that. And Kate, I'm looking for you on my screen. But if there's other things that I need to make sure that we mention before we close out, please remind me.
Just a big thank you to Afua for being present with us and sharing such a fantastic presentation. You'll get the slides and the recording and any resources shared tomorrow in a follow-up email. We'll look forward to getting your feedback. So really appreciate you taking the time to fill that out. And I put a link in the chat to our free workshops that we offer each week for public servants in our first 5 cohort of states. So would love to see you all in the future. And as always, feel free to reach out to us. That's all we've got.
Thanks all.
Great. Thanks, Afua.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thanks, Afua. Thank you, everyone.
Have a safe weekend.
And Kate, just wanted to check if you needed me to stay on for a few minutes or if it's fine for me to drop off now.
No, good on my end. We'll
Great.
send you the feedback in about a week, and really appreciate you taking the time.
Great. Thanks so much. Bye.
Okay, bye.